Hey, homeowners, Sean Miller here today with Beneath the Surface, and I have a very special guest with me. This is Jeff Harin with Hunt Auctioneers, and we're going to talk about the auction business today. So,
Thanks, Sean. Glad to be here.
Good.
This is neat. So I've been in the business about 10 years.
Yeah.
Hunt Auctioneers has been in business for close to 50.
Yes.
So a lot of experience, wealth of experience at the office.
Yeah. So Tommy, they goes by Tommy. I can remember he's a great auctioneer. So how did you get exposed to Tommy?
Just years of working with Tommy, working with some family connections, and just realizing this was the business that I wanted to be in. I owned a packaged ice company in Glasgow for almost 20 years. When I sold that business, I knew what exactly that I would be doing.
Yes.
So it wasn't that I wasn't searching for something. I knew where I was going.
Somebody told me that. I forgot that you had the packaged ice business before. So I used to want to be an auctioneer too, did some research. There was a book that came out called The Millionaire Next Door. Probably one of the best books that I've ever read. And it did some demographics and some stats. And it said something like, what they did is they did this college did a study, and they would mail like $2 or $3 or $5 or $10 in an envelope, and they would ask questions, and you had to have a net worth of at least $1 million or more. In most cases, they were looking for a decamillionaire. So once they found these people, they would reply to these questionnaires and come back in, and they just ask them questions like, what's the most you've ever paid for a pair of shoes? What kind of car do you drive? And so
haircut, I think haircuts in there too, isn't it?
Yeah. And so the only thing they found in common with these decamillionaires, most of them, with the fact that they play golf and the number one occupation was an auctioneer. And I was fascinated with that. So do you have any input on that, why that might be?
Well, I would think that when we talk about millionaires, we're usually talking about wealth building. And I think auctioneers just by trade learn values for different properties, mostly or primarily real estate, but it can be anything. So that might be one factor, is just that understanding of value and
the true value, and
seeing a timeline to understand appreciation of assets.
And I think that's what that book went in to discover. These guys really know the true value, like the real cash value of an asset. So, and then they see somebody that's built their life like me. I've, built this business here, and I have all these assets sitting around. And if I ever had to liquidate them, I'm going to get pennies on the dollars for what I invested them. And in some cases, just not retail, I guess. But so the auction business is designed, and a lot of people think, I guess, you're going to not make money if you auction things off, but in today's marketplace.
Oh, yeah, no. There are certain assets that always sell better at auctions, typically farmland.
Yes.
In Kentucky, really across the Midwest, anywhere, typically sells higher at auction. And it's through the competitive bidding process that we can find true market value. You price something privately, you've got one person, but in an auction, you've got bidders standing in a live auction, bidders standing across from each other, bidding, kind of building the idea of value just through competition. And then further, today with the internet, any auction we have, we also incorporate internet bidding. So now geographic barriers are now eliminated.
Oh, wow.
We don't even, the bidder doesn't even have to be there.
Right.
We'd love for them to see it.
Right.
We don't mean sight unseen. We don't want to require them to actually be there.
So, and also if you're a very wealthy investor and you're picking up an asset and you don't want the whole world to know what you're doing, you can discreetly purchase this property. So.
We use that tool as well. It may be that, it may be an investment property that we really would prefer investors not to all be standing there. If it's a small market for an item, that works well to do an online only format.
So that's pretty neat.
Yeah.
When I bought this building, it was at auction, and I brought the investors because I wanted the people at that auction to know that we can buy this building. So that was my strategy. But the auctioneer thought this place would go for about $480,000. I was like, where did you get that number? And he just said years of experience in the auctioneering business. And so this thing sold for about $650 plus auctioneering fees. So $690,000 later, we're the
You own the building.
This building. Yeah. So had to put 180, 100 or so into it to make it a building, but it was a very neat experience. Most money I've ever spent in my life, and a lot of competition. So a lot of interest, a lot of tools, a lot of different people here, and just my best friend was one of them. He was down at the end, and he did a final bid. So it was interesting how that happened. So.
Well, that just shows how the auction process works. So you said you had an idea, that auctioneer had an idea, but through the competitive bidding process, true market value was found.
Right.
And obviously the seller was very happy that
Right.
he was a little low.
That's exactly right.
So it's great.
But we knew we'd have to be like the landscapers and people like that with occupation. So we were talking earlier how the auctioneering business has changed. And so I was telling him about the chant. And I used to read about these chants and look at these auctioneer schools. And I would up daddy, bought some butter, said it's butter bitter. So, and you get this chant. So I was asking him, how did you learn your chant? And he's like, you don't really use that much anymore with online. And
it's funny, when somebody asks, what do you do? I'm an auctioneer. Can you do it? Can you do it? Can you talk fast? that's what they ask. But, and there is a part of that.
Right.
And we still do utilize that in some live sales, but more and more sales will be online only, where we use a different means to create urgency.
Yeah.
There's still a timeline. It's still a defined date and time to act, as opposed to a private listing that a lot of times I like to say, the sign goes up, it's new. A week later, 2 weeks later, it certainly just becomes noise, kind of white noise. And the auction is different than that. And we accelerate that marketing up to sale day.
Because you learn about auctioneers usually in the paper. What are some other ways? Online, I guess? Or
online. I've done some TV for marketing for different properties because newspapers can be great for, say, an investment property. But in my mind, somebody looking for, say, a new home, looking in the auction section in the newspaper isn't their first go-to.
Right.
So TV, social media. It just depends. You need to match your market, the media, what your method of advertising to what that respective
that makes sense.
Bidder really is, who he is, where they are.
Makes sense. So you got to be a pretty good savvy business person to kind of find who that clientele is.
Yeah, sure, because you've got a limited amount of resources to allocate for each sale, and you need to do that as efficiently as possible.
Right. So, and you help if somebody's say, if I want to auction off this building, you're going to come in and like, okay, we probably need to put this much in marketing. And this is what we kind of did based on our due diligence of what this is going to sell for in this area, this amount of acreage and that kind of thing.
You're real close. So that's exactly right. Come get a feel for the property, think about who our target audience is, and develop that marketing plan that fits that.
Perfect.
You don't want to waste advertising dollars, but that's certainly not the place to try to save money. That's how we find those potential bidders.
I see. So do you have a story that you share where the auction concept just far exceeded maybe expectation or was really good to the person that chose to do it, and maybe a story that was maybe not so good?
Well, we all I have stories, properties that have been listed and were listed for a couple of years, and somebody calls and says, I've just got to move this. And you go see the property and you're satisfied with it. You get the background, no offers, and sell at auction way over asking price. And, you scratch your head, how did that ever happen? But it does, because the auction process can be so much more proactive. You just change the game, the reach. I sold a mobile home park one time that had listed, never had an offer. It sold over asking price.
Wow.
Multiple bidders from multiple states. Wow. And it wasn't that, and we were live on site with online bidding. There wasn't that many people there, but the computer sounded like an electronic slot machine, just with bids from multiple states. So those are cool things.
So even though it's trailer park, it's got cash flow, and that real estate works a lot like an apartment complex. It just might be a different demographic. And so
that, and I'll tell you, the other thing is that it's a business where they need geographic diversity, because they don't want too many in any one location. You need to spread around the southeastern United States. So it makes sense that your bidders, and I don't want to say that they didn't do their homework,
right,
because they did,
right.
But they did their job, went home and bid. They didn't have to plan their week around my sale. They did it from their office.
Wow.
So it's cool. But
so you didn't have to do logistics of flying on a
sure.
plane. You just picked up a phone
so really it's a cost savings.
So does that guy get pre-qualified?
Costs. Oh yeah, we had pre-qualifications, but cost savings for those bidders as well.
Yeah.
So because as I say, we take out some of those geographic issues.
I like that.
And then we've used the auction method to solve really complicated problems. We did a most interesting sale probably was one in Florida a couple of years ago. Fella had it was a shipping container business, shipping container storage business.
Yeah.
So we needed help liquidate this business. Shipping containers were probably at an all-time high due to COVID and shortage of containers. But the business, it was an asset sale. At that point, it really was. So how do you deal with hundreds, and I mean 400 to 500 shipping containers, not in one location,
right,
spread out all over the state of Florida? But you got to sell them all.
Yeah.
And we did a pretty neat, kind of going back to the ice business and running an ice route. I grouped these things together in routes like I would want to efficiently run with a truck to service, and we sold them as income packages.
Wow.
Maybe 12 to 20 units in one. There may be as many as 100.
Wow. So that's pretty neat. So kind of like a mini storage building.
Mini storage.
Some of these storage units.
And they're all on private property. So it had to be something we're selling a rent roll.
Wow.
Now we warranted it. If there was anything wrong, we said, hey, this is the way we have to do it, Mr.
Right.
Seller. But that's the way we handled it. But what a cool way to solve a problem. But how else do you deal with 400 or 500 units scattered out that you don't even have your hands on?
Very neat. Very neat.
So there's some things that you can do with the auction that you just can't do any other way. Probably locally, the things we've done with the auction method would be the sales where we've had infrastructure issues, like say sewer, quotes for sewer, where when we may sell some frontage tracks, and we also may do an add-on, we'll get a contract for sewer to service all those lots, and those buyers will pay their pro rata share of that sewer. But now think about what we've done. We've gone from bringing end users into each of those lots. Right. These were business lots and commercial lots,
right,
as opposed to just really working well for a developer.
So what he's talking about here is, I looked at my wife after we bought this, and I said, we almost made a mistake. And she said, why is that? And I said, look at this. I didn't study this enough and do enough due diligence, but we have railroad tracks over here, interstate over here. I said, there's no utilities out here. There's no natural gas. There's no sewer and any of that. And so these guys know to think like that. And so if this thing would have got divvied off to, an acre by 15 different buyers, then that would have probably been bought up. So the good news is we think it's going to expand. It'll come this way, but it's just we're not landlocked kind of, but we kind of are. So that would have been a serious thing. It's we're sitting there thinking we could develop it one day if we ever needed to, if it didn't work out. But
it's funny. It's a good point, because as the auctioneer, in a private sale, typically the property goes under contract, and then somebody that buyer starts doing their due diligence.
Right.
Where are these utilities? Where this? And the auction, that's typically me trying to present some sort of exhibit showing where all those utilities are, doing that homework for the buyers so that we can put that up front and market in that way. Because in an auction, of course, we want to produce a non-contingent contract date of sale,
right,
with a relatively quick close.
Right.
We don't want, it's not subject to financing. It's not subject to further inspection. So that's why we provide most of that.
So that's why you want to do business with an established auctioneer company, because you guys have 50 years of history one way or the other. Then you got all this combined experience from all these different industries. but they know that railroad track runs. So they know where the utilities are. They know how this kind of what it's worth, what's kind of happened, and that sort of thing.
So that's one of the greatest. You mentioned Tommy's been in this for 50 years. And one of the greatest benefits is also 50 years of developing. So when you're a developer, then you're selling a property at auction. You're thinking like a developer. How do I, reverse engineering it back to what is the most efficient concept to sell this property? How does it need to be tracked if we're doing divisions?
Right.
Where do those, say, utility easements need to go? What does a buyer who is a developer, how do they look at this property?
Right.
So that we can present it in a way to be the most attractive.
Right. So, and I've heard people talk like this, and this may not apply to the auctioneer, but it might. But so, who really pays that auctioneer fee? Is it the buyer of the property? Is it the seller of the property? If somebody says, "I don't want to auction off because I don't want to pay the auctioneer fee, or I don't want to pay that real estate fee," who, from a business perspective?
It's a good question. Typically, in the most real estate sales, we use a buyer's premium. That is and that's our fee that's added to the high bid.
Right. That
determines or becomes the contract purchase price of the property.
Right.
So for lack of a $100,000 high bid, if you had a 10% buyer's premium, you would have a $110,000 purchase contract.
Right.
That would be the contract price on the real estate.
Right.
So that's a good way to, in our mind, that's a good way to let the buyer share in some of the cost of the auction. Remember, the seller still has some expenses if there were survey,
right,
advertising, things like that.
Right.
But we're doing this sale to expose it to the buyers for the buyer's benefit as well.
Right.
So that's a way that all parties can share in some of that cost.
So it's a good way to move the property.
We think it works well.
It does. Today, in the marketplace, the house will probably move pretty quick, but maybe not a farm or something. But there are times in the marketplace where these houses just sit and sit and sit and sit, and it's nice to know, hey, I want to move this thing, pick up the phone and call.
It is, and I'll add to that. It's not. There are also times when the house is just part of a bigger picture. Imagine an estate.
Right.
Okay. So there is a property. I said estate, so you can imagine older individual was there. Do you have deferred maintenance? Do you have issues around the house that are going to cause inspection issues?
Right.
Once again, we sell at auction as is where it is.
Right.
Doesn't mean that we don't allow a bidder to come in and make their own inspections. We welcome that.
Right.
But when you bid not contingent on financing or inspections.
Right.
But the bigger thing is, remember, there's some estate attorney trying to close this estate. We don't need a house that's under contract and then fails inspections and then comes back on the market and then drags what should have been a relatively
so you got
got
a finality to this thing.
Right. So because remember, it's just one piece, usually the largest piece, but nevertheless, it's very inconvenient for them to have to start marketing again. And this, so that's why the auction can be so beneficial for those type of properties.
I like it. When we bought this building, there's about 40 containers sitting around there because this guy was in the storage container business. He would actually rent them out here. There was probably $1 million worth of equipment around here, and a lot of it ran. It looked terrible, but the thing that shocked me the most is, as I told them in the budget, we need $150,000 just to get rid of the junk that's going to be left when we get done doing it. There was scrap metal laying everywhere. Do you know every single bit of it sold and was removed within 30 days from this property? And I'm like, how else could you get that done? Because in the auctioneer, when you auction something off, they would have so many days to come get that asset and to remove it from that property. And so we had one lift out here in the building. The guy wouldn't come pick it up. So we made a phone call to the auctioneer. He made a phone call. That guy was there that afternoon and removing that lift. So
that's reminds me of a story. One of my first sales that I did was a large equipment auction.
Yes.
And there was quite a bit of it was scrap. And some of the comments I had, I mentioned the online platform, and I would have these scrap haulers that would come in, and one of them just said, I know I paid more for this buying it this way online, but I didn't spend 2 days here getting it bought.
Looking for it.
Well, yeah, he just, and some of these guys, who knows, but they were able to log in. They bought what they wanted. came to the pickup, had their invoice paid, loaded, and gone. So it's a very efficient way for some of those.
I'm that way.
And that's kind of like what you just described.
Yeah, my time
Property's
is important
clean.
to me. I don't have all this time to do all this search to get, and I might get a better deal if I did. But the thing is, it's not worth my time. I have other fish to fry.
Well, so how many? Everybody's been to an auction that, towards the end, the bidders they're tired. They're starting to trickle off. Well, in an online auction, that last item in the sale brings every bit as high or relatively as the first item, and sometimes more, because I've seen it. I've seen the situation where, they're coming, the truck's almost loaded. Hey, let's go ahead and get this stuff too while we're here. Whereas, if they had just been at a live sale and they didn't have it, I'm not going to fool with that at this point. So, I can see that's how it can, when I say certain items can bring 4 or 5 times as much online, and somebody says, well, how can that be? I don't mean the very first item. I don't mean the headline bulldozer. I'm talking about those few items at the end that are still well worth the money.
Right.
But you don't want to tie up your whole day buying them. And that's how it happens.
That's the instant gratification, I guess. Because it means something. I mean, I'm sorry, and but that's how I roll. I like that. If I see something I kind of want it, and it works.
Right.
So, and then you might once you find something that's kind of hard to find, then to take action on that. So,
sure. And once again, if you're doing it in an online sale, you can put that max bid in, walk away, you're done. You get the invoice emailed to you, and know when to come pick it up.
Yeah.
So very efficient way to buy.
So you said Florida earlier. Do you just auction in Kentucky, or are you licensed in a couple of states?
We're licensed in Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, Florida.
Wow.
So
good. Florida, probably a good state to have auction business in. So,
yeah.
Another question, is it a male dominated field? Like nursing might be more female, and is auctioneer mostly male dominated, or is there some females out there auctioneers that I don't know about?
So we do have female auctioneers, but I will also say that within the auction business, and we're not benefit auctioneers, that's almost, we call them auctioneers, but it's almost 2 segments, right? But fundraising, right. I think you see more of that in the fundraising. Some women auctioneers can be very persuasive when raising funds for good causes. I mean, they do a tremendous job.
So we went to Handbags for Hope, probably the smallest auction I go to all year. We love it, but I'm going to tell you what, those women have more money than the men ever thought about. I mean, purses going for $20,000 and to a great cause. So,
well, I would say just like everything, it's changing.
Wow. I'd gone to the restroom at this Handbags for Hope, and I sat down at my chair, and I reached down and I got my buddy's auction number, and I'm sitting here waving it. Well, that auctioneer, he picked it up. I must have raised it up a little bit too high, but I thought, well,
it's an scratch.
That was JB and Sheska Hunt. So they're looking at me like, so anyway, crazy story, but I said, I better not do that no more to Mary, because I said that might have cost me a friendship if we didn't have the money to pay. But anyway, it closed at $9,000. My wife looking at me like that right there. So she's like, you just bought a $9,000 purse, and I didn't. Somebody else did.
It's funny you said that, but we all hear stories about things like that. But what we do try at our auctions, say a real estate auction here in Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Yeah,
we try we go very slow. Be very, very clear. We don't want a first-time home buyer to come and feel that they don't know what's going on, that they're confused, intimidated.
Right.
Because we want this process, because this could be their first real estate sale they've ever been to.
That's true.
And so we try to make this a very welcoming experience. And I would contrast that to when we think of these great bid callers, right? Cattle auctions, auto auctions. Those are typically.
I'm in the Fairview produce auction.
Right.
I don't even know what's going on in that.
But those are typically professional buyers. Yeah. They almost know where it's going to start and end, because that's what they do all day long, every day.
That's right.
So once again, know your audience, right? And our audience at a real estate auction, it's about clarity, slow, clear precise. Have your ringmen that are on the ground help with those people. If
Yeah.
they're online, we communicate with them as well.
Perfect. So I see there's a spectrum of buyers here because you're going to lose interest if they're slow and you're a professional daily produce buyer. So,
Exactly. Those guys don't want to.
yeah.
But for somebody that's really looking at a home and unsure, our job's to help, not to make it confusing.
Wow. So neat stuff here. I heard a story one time. I don't know if this is true. I didn't verify, but I heard in Australia that they do it the opposite way that Americans do auction. Like we go up to the highest bidder. In Australia, I heard that they start way up here and they start coming down. And the first person that raises their flag, they buy. Is that true?
There are different. That is true. There are different formats in different countries.
Right. That's amazing. So I'd hate to be at auction like that if I really wanted what was for sale. So,
that would appear to be pretty stressful to me.
Wow. Yes. So, well, great. We are so happy that you guys were here today. I think the memory I have of Tommy Hunt was he started this auction off one time. It was on the corner of Campbell Lane, across from Hardee's. You know where that is? When that auctioned off.
Yeah.
So Tommy opened up the auctioneer, like, oh, and he started. And he's the first person to bid. He said, sold. He said, we're here to do business today, folks. So get your bid card out. But that got everybody on their toes, and it started a momentum. And so these guys are so great at doing that. And then maybe when you get that stall on the floor, and you got your ring guys out there, they're working.
Right.
And so
right. Well, there's a strategy to that, as you see. Everybody knew we're not going to go slow today, so get in and be active if you plan to buy.
Right.
And
so that's neat. You might have multiple rings of businesses or auctions going on at the same time.
That's typically what you saw in some of the larger estate sales that had more or farm tools and stuff like that you needed a couple of rings going, or you'd be there all night.
And so I did that one time in this auction here, and there was a couple of air compressors that were built into the building and shelves that were built into the building, and there was a different ring going. Long story short, I went out after the auction and bought that stuff back from the people that bought it at auction. So talking about big business, but these things that we just didn't want them to leave the building, and I didn't know. I was not a familiar auctioneer guy. So is there any words of wisdom, or is there a principle, or is there something that you would share if we're on this spectrum of maybe a first time home buyer or seller that maybe has some property that or maybe it's an estate, maybe there's a group of children that have inherited their parents' assets and they need to try to find like this passive common ground to settle this estate so they're not bickering and maybe tension between the family members.
Sure, it happens. That's a common scenario. And what I'd like to say is, there's a saying: if you want to know what something's worth, sell it at auction.
Right.
And it's transparent. As an auctioneer, my job is to expose that asset to the broadest market you can, and find truly every dollar there is available.
Right.
And that's how we find clarity and closure for a lot of those people. They're comfortable with it. It was a true, transparent, public format.
So if somebody had some land and you could identify that it had the timber assets on it, and then we could probably start with that, maybe release some money for the marketing to do the rest of it, or do it all, or sell the timber off of it.
You can. Timber companies these days prefer to buy timber intact, leave it there just because it gives them more time to remove. We have seen periods of time when timber was commonly severed, meaning they bought just the timber and had so many months, years to remove.
Gotcha.
They do prefer a little more time now, and you'll see them remarketing of some of that cut over timber later.
Right. Yeah. So great. So Jeff Harin with Thomas Hunt Auctioneers, great auctioneering service. They're personal friends of my grandparents. They go way, way, way back. I can't imagine what that guy's seen in this town and what's going to happen. That just seeing the changes of Bowling Green over 50 years. So we appreciate your insight, and we're glad to have you. And we're looking forward to visiting with you again in the future. And if you have an auction need or real estate need or need to liquidate something,
give us a call.
Give them a call. So how do they get a hold of you? They go online, or they
online, or just give us a call. 270-590-2332 is my cell.
So if you want to go to several auctions and you want to be on a newsletter, do you guys have something?
We'll put you. Yes, if you sign up at an auction, we'll get you on the email list to see what's coming next.
Right.
You can watch our website. We post, everything is posted on the website. So you'll see pretty much a month in advance what's going to be coming up.
I just noticed there's a lot of the same people at auction. They may not be buying, they may just be looking, but there's certain people that like that auction platform. And so great.
Right. And it's a great opportunity for young folks that want their first home. Do your homework first.
Right.
Be sure you talk to your bank and get your financing in place. But what a great opportunity.
Yes.
To know you're buying at the market, not just at list price. And,
right.
So
did I give too much? Did they ask too much? And that sort of thing. You'll know what it's
right.
worth.
Right. Exactly. And so I think far too many people miss that opportunity to buy at that true market price.
Right.
So
great. So we appreciate the insight and visiting with us today. And so that's all today with Beneath the Surface. And we'll see you again next time.